Hello, everybody. Hope you are having a good time. Today, I am going to elaborate the concept of the art of listening. Listening is one of the most important skills we can develop as leaders, as friends, and as human beings, and yet it's a skill that so many of us take for granted. Most of the time, we think we're listening, but we're not. We're hearing, sure, our ears pick up the sound waves, but that's not the same as listening. Listening requires intention, it requires presence. It's about more than just processing the words someone says. It's about understanding the meaning behind those words, the emotions tied to them, and even the silences between them. You know what happens when we're not really listening? We miss the opportunity to connect. That's the real power of listening connection. And when we're not listening, it's not just that the other person feels unheard or unimportant. We also miss out. We miss out on the insight they're offering. We miss out on the trust we could be building. We miss out on the opportunity to learn something new. I think about the last time you had a conversation with someone and you knew they weren't really listening to you. You could tell, right? Maybe they were distracted. Maybe they were looking at their phone. Maybe they were nodding, but their eyes were glazed over. How did that feel? Did you feel like what you were saying mattered? Probably not. And when you feel that way, it makes you less likely to share, to open up, or to feel connected to that person. That's what happens when we fail to truly listen. On the flip side, think about a time when someone really listened to you. Really listened. They weren't interrupting you, they weren't rushing to respond, and they weren't distracted by their own agenda. They were fully present, fully engaged. How did that feel? It felt good, didn't it? It felt like what you were saying mattered, like you mattered. That's the gift of listening. It's a gift that we give to others, and it's a gift we give to ourselves. So how do we do it? How do we move from hearing to listening? It starts with being present. And being present isn't just about putting your phone down or making eye contact, although those things are important. Being present means giving someone your undivided attention. It means shutting off the voice in your head that's already crafting your response. It means letting go of your agenda and focusing on theirs. When we listen, our goal shouldn't be to reply. It should be to understand. Too often, we listen with the intent to respond. We're just waiting for our turn to talk, waiting for the pause, so we can jump in with our thoughts, our opinions, our solutions. But when we do that, we're not really listening, we're just waiting. Real listening is about curiosity. It's about asking questions. It's about digging deeper to uncover the meaning behind the words. It's about seeking to understand, not to be understood. And when we listen this way, it changes the dynamic of the conversation. It creates a space where people feel safe to share, to be vulnerable, to open up. Let me tell you a story. I was working with a leader who prided himself on being a good listener. He told me he always made time for his team, always had an open door policy. But when I talked to his team, they told me a different story. They said he was always distracted, always rushing them, always looking at his phone during conversations. He thought he was listening, but he wasn't. He was hearing, sure, but he wasn't truly listening. So I asked him to try something. I asked him to spend 1 week practicing intentional listening. No phone, no interruptions, just full presence in every conversation. And you know what happened? His team noticed immediately. They felt the difference. They felt heard, they felt valued, and they started opening up in ways they never had before. That's the power of listening. And here's the thing, listening isn't just a skill we use at work. It's something we use in every aspect of our lives. With our partners, with our kids, with our friends. When we listen, we strengthen relationships. We build trust. We create connections. I once had a friend tell me that he didn't feel like his teenage daughter ever talked to him. He said, "She just shuts me out. I try to talk to her, but she never opens up." So I asked him, when was the last time you just listened to her? No advice, no judgment, no interruptions, just listened. He admitted it had been a while. So I challenged him to try it. And when he did, everything changed. He said, "It was hard. I wanted to jump in and fix things, to give her advice, but I held back. I just listened, and you know what happened? She started talking more. She started sharing things she'd never shared before. Because she felt safe. Because she felt heard." That's the magic of listening. And here's the best part: when we listen, we learn. We learn things we never would have learned if we'd just been waiting for our turn to talk. We gain insights, we hear new perspectives, and we grow. Listening isn't just about helping others feel heard, it's about helping ourselves grow as individuals. Listening is one of the most important skills we can develop as leaders, as friends, and as human beings. And yet, it's a skill that so many of us take for granted. Most of the time we think we're listening, but we're not. We're hearing, sure, our ears pick up the sound waves, but that's not the same as listening. Listening requires intention. It requires presence. It's about more than just processing the words someone says. It's about understanding the meaning behind those words, the emotions tied to them, and even the silences between them. You know what happens when we're not really listening? We miss the opportunity to connect. That's the real power of listening connection. And when we're not listening, it's not just that the other person feels unheard or unimportant. We also miss out. We miss out on the insight they're offering. We miss out on the trust we could be building. We miss out on the opportunity to learn something new. I think about the last time you had a conversation with someone and you knew they weren't really listening to you. You could tell, right? Maybe they were distracted, maybe they were looking at their phone, maybe they were nodding, but their eyes were glazed over. How did that feel? Did you feel like what you were saying mattered? Probably not. And when you feel that way, it makes you less likely to share, to open up, or to feel connected to that person. That's what happens when we fail to truly listen. On the flip side, think about a time when someone really listened to you. I mean, really listened. They weren't interrupting you, they weren't rushing to respond, and they weren't distracted by their own agenda. They were fully present, fully engaged. How did that feel? It felt good, didn't it? It felt like what you were saying mattered, like you mattered, like you mattered. That's the gift of listening. It's a gift we give to others, and it's a gift we give to ourselves. So how do we do it? How do we move from hearing to listening? It starts with being present. And being present isn't just about putting your phone down or making eye contact, although those things are important. Being present means giving someone your undivided attention. It means shutting off the voice in your head that's already crafting your response. It means letting go of your agenda and focusing on theirs. When we listen, our goal shouldn't be to reply. It should be to understand. Too often we listen with the intent to respond. We're just waiting for our turn to talk, waiting for the pause, so we can jump in with our thoughts, our opinions, our solutions. But when we do that, we're not really listening, we're just waiting. Real listening is about curiosity. It's about asking questions. It's about digging deeper to uncover the meaning behind the words. It's about seeking to understand, not to be understood. And when we listen this way, it changes the dynamic of the conversation. It creates a space where people feel safe to share, to be vulnerable, to open up. Let me tell you a story. I was working with a leader who prided himself on being a good listener. He told me he always made time for his team, always had an open door policy. But when I talked to his team, they told me a different story. They said he was always distracted, always rushing them, always looking at his phone during conversations. He thought he was listening, but he wasn't. He was hearing, sure, but he wasn't truly listening. So I asked him to try something. I asked him to spend 1 week practicing intentional listening. No phone, no interruptions, just full presence in every conversation. And you know what happened? His team noticed immediately. They felt the difference. They felt heard, they felt valued, and they started opening up in ways they never had before. That's the power of listening. And here's the thing, listening isn't just a skill we use at work. It's something we use in every aspect of our lives. With our partners, with our kids, with our friends. When we listen, we strengthen relationships. We build trust. We create connections. I once had a friend tell me that he didn't feel like his teenage daughter ever talked to him. He said, "She just shuts me out." I try to talk to her, but she never opens up, so I asked him, "When was the last time you just listened to her?" No advice, no judgment, no interruptions, just listened. He admitted it had been a while, so I challenged him to try it. And when he did, everything changed. He said it was hard. I wanted to jump in and fix things, to give her advice. But I held back. I just listened. And you know what happened? She started talking more. She started sharing things she'd never shared before. Because she felt safe. Because she felt heard. That's the magic of listening. And here's the best part: when we listen, we learn. We learn things we never would have learned if we'd just been waiting for our turn to talk. We gain insights, we hear new perspectives, and we grow. Listening isn't just about helping others feel heard, it's about helping ourselves grow as individuals. Being present is one of the most fundamental yet overlooked skills in human interaction. Let me ask you something: how often are we truly present? I don't mean just sitting in the same room as someone. I mean really being there mentally, emotionally, and physically in such a way that the person across from you feels seen and heard. Too often we mistake proximity for connection. You see it all the time. We're physically close to each other, but our minds are somewhere else. Maybe we're glancing at our phones, thinking about a meeting later, or mentally rehearsing what we're going to say next. That's not presence. Presence is about being all in, no distractions, no divided attention. It's about saying, in this moment, you are the most important person in my world. The irony is that it's so simple, yet so rare. When someone is truly present with us, we feel it. There's a palpable energy in the room. Think about the last time someone made you feel like the only person that mattered. What did they do? Chances are, they weren't multitasking. They weren't rushing you to get to their point. They gave you the gift of their undivided attention. We live in a world that rewards busyness. Everyone's rushing, hustling, trying to fit 1,000 things into their day. We've convinced ourselves that being busy equals being productive. But the truth is, the busier we are, the harder it is to be present. And here's the kicker: being present isn't just about the other person, it's about us too. When we're truly present, we gain more clarity, more understanding, and quite frankly, more fulfillment from the interaction. Think about the difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is passive, it happens automatically. Listening, on the other hand, is active. It requires intention. Presence is the same. It's not something that just happens because you're sitting across from someone. It requires effort. It requires a conscious decision to be here now. Let me share a story with you. A few years ago, I met a leader who had a reputation for making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. His name was Jack. Jack wasn't just a good listener, he was a master of presence. Whether you were an intern or a senior executive, when you sat down with Jack, you had his full attention. No phone, no glancing at his watch, no interruptions. Just you and Jack. One day I asked him how he did it. How did he manage to stay so present, especially with the weight of running $1 billion company on his shoulders? He said, "Simon, it's simple. When I'm with someone, I remind myself that this is the only moment that matters. The emails can wait. The meetings can wait. Right now, the person in front of me deserves my full attention. Anything less is disrespectful." That stuck with me. Jack wasn't just giving people his time, he was giving them his respect. And that's the thing about presence: it's not just a skill, it's a choice. It's a decision to honor the person in front of you by showing up fully. But here's the challenge: being present isn't always comfortable. When we're present, we have to confront the reality of the moment. We can't hide behind distractions or escape into our thoughts. We have to engage. We have to feel. And sometimes we have to deal with things we'd rather avoid. For example, think about a difficult conversation you've had recently. Maybe it was with a colleague, a partner, or a friend. Was it easier to stay fully present, or did you find yourself mentally checking out? When the stakes are high, our instinct is often to protect ourselves, to distance ourselves emotionally. But that's precisely when presence matters most. When we're present in those moments, we build trust. We show the other person that we're willing to sit in the discomfort with them. We're not running away. And trust me, that kind of presence leaves a lasting impression. It says, "I'm here. I see you. I'm not going anywhere." Now, some of you might be thinking, this all sounds great, but how do I actually do it? How do I stay present when my mind is racing, or when I'm overwhelmed with everything I have to do? The answer is practice. Like any skill, presence gets easier with practice. One technique I've found helpful is grounding yourself in the moment. Before you walk into a meeting, take a deep breath. Remind yourself why you're there. Put your phone on silent and out of sight. And if you find your mind wandering during the conversation, gently bring it back. It's not about being perfect, it's about being intentional. Another powerful tool is curiosity. When you approach a conversation with genuine curiosity, it's much easier to stay present. Instead of thinking about what you're going to say next, focus on what the other person is saying. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this moment? What can I learn from this person? Curiosity shifts the focus away from us and onto the other person. It helps us listen not just to respond, but to understand. And when we listen to understand, we create a space where real connection can happen. Connection is what it's all about. At the end of the day, people don't remember what you said or did nearly as much as how you made them feel. Presence is what makes people feel valued, respected, and understood. It's what turns ordinary interactions into meaningful experiences. Let me leave you with this thought: presence is a gift. It's one of the most valuable things we can give to another person. And the best part, it doesn't cost a thing. It just requires us to slow down, tune in, and show up fully. When we do that, we not only transform our relationships, we transform ourselves. Let me tell you something about asking questions. It's not just a skill, it's an art. It's about curiosity, about a genuine desire to understand the other person. When someone is speaking, too often we're just waiting for our turn to talk. We're thinking about what we're going to say next, or worse, we're jumping to conclusions before they've even finished. That's not listening, that's waiting. If you want to really connect with someone, if you want to show them that you value their perspective, then ask questions. The most powerful question you can ask is why. It's deceptively simple, isn't it? But think about the time someone has asked you, why do you feel that way, or why is this important to you? It forces you to dig deeper. It forces you to articulate something you might not have even thought about before. That's the magic of asking why. It's not about interrogating someone, it's about inviting them to share more of themselves. And that's where trust begins. Now, here's the thing about questions: they have to come from a place of genuine curiosity. People can sense when you're asking just to fill the silence or to steer the conversation in a direction you want. Don't ask a question because you're trying to lead them somewhere. Ask because you care about the answer. When someone senses that you're truly curious, that you're invested in understanding them, they'll open up in ways you can't imagine. Let me share an example. I was once working with a team that was struggling with morale. Everyone was frustrated, but no one could articulate why. So I started asking questions. I didn't start with, "What's the problem?" That's too broad. Instead, I asked, "What's something that's been bothering you lately?" And then, "How does that make you feel?" And finally, "Why do you think that is?" By the time we were done, the root cause of their frustration wasn't a mystery anymore. It was something they'd all been feeling but hadn't been able to put into words until someone asked the right questions. Here's another example. I was speaking with a young entrepreneur who was struggling to inspire her team. She kept saying, "I just don't understand why they're not motivated." So I asked her, "What do you think motivates them?" She gave me a few generic answers: money, recognition, things like that. So I pushed further, "Why do you think that?" And she paused. She realized she'd never actually asked her team what motivates them. She was guessing. And because she was guessing, she was missing the mark. That one question changed everything for her. It gave her a new approach, a new way to connect with her team. The key to asking good questions is listening to the answers. I mean, really listening, because sometimes the answer to your question will lead to another deeper question. For example, if someone tells you they're frustrated because they don't feel heard, the obvious follow-up is, what makes you feel unheard, or what would make you feel more valued? Those aren't complex questions, but they open the door to meaningful dialogue. It's also important to know when to stop asking questions. Sometimes people just need to vent. They need to get something off their chest without being prodded or analyzed. You can still ask clarifying questions, but don't overdo it. The goal is to understand, not to interrogate. There's a balance between guiding a conversation and letting it flow naturally. The best way to find that balance is to pay attention. Watch their body language. Listen to their tone. If they start to pull back or get defensive, it might be time to back off and just listen. And let me tell you, silence can be your best friend in a conversation. It's amazing what people will say when you give them the space to fill the silence. After you ask a question, resist the urge to jump in right away. Let the silence linger. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but that's where the gold is. People need time to think. They need time to process. And when you give them that time, they'll often say things they wouldn't have if you'd rushed to fill the gap. There's a phrase one loves: seek first to understand, then to be understood. It's not mine, but it's something I live by. When you approach a conversation with the sole intent of understanding the other person, you build a foundation of trust. And trust is everything. Without it, there's no relationship, no collaboration, no progress. Asking questions is how you build that trust. It's how you show people that you're not just listening to reply, you're listening to understand. Let's talk about the types of questions we ask. There are closed questions and open questions. Closed questions give you a yes or no answer. They're great for getting specific information, but they don't do much for deepening a conversation. Open questions, on the other hand, invite the other person to share more. Instead of asking, did you enjoy the meeting, ask, what did you think of the meeting? That small shift opens the door to a richer conversation. And here's something else to consider: the way you ask a question matters just as much as the question itself. Your tone, your body language, your expression, all of it influences how your question is received. If you ask, why did you do that, in an accusatory tone, it's going to shut people down. But if you ask the same question with genuine curiosity, it opens the door to understanding. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it. You also have to be willing to go off script. Sometimes we come into a conversation with a mental checklist of questions we want to ask. And that's fine, but don't let your checklist blind you to what's happening in the moment. If someone says something unexpected, follow that thread. Be willing to deviate from your plan. Some of the best insights come from questions you didn't plan to ask. Let me give you another example. I was having a conversation with a leader who was struggling to retain employees. He kept talking about all the things he was doing to improve the work environment: better pay, more perks, flexible hours. But people were still leaving. So I asked, have you asked your employees why they're leaving? He looked at me like I just asked the most obvious question in the world. But he hadn't asked them, he'd made assumptions. So I said, what's stopping you from asking them? That question led to a breakthrough for him. He realized he was afraid of the answers he might get. Once he faced that fear and started having honest conversations with his employees, everything changed. The point is, questions are a tool. They're how we dig beneath the surface. They're how we get to the heart of the matter. But they're only effective if we use them with intention and care. So the next time you're in a conversation, slow down. Be present. Ask questions not to reply, but to understand. You might be surprised by what you discover. Listening without judgment is not easy. It requires us to step out of our own mindset, our own agenda, and be fully present with the other person. Too often, when we listen, we're not truly listening, we're waiting. We're waiting for the moment we can insert our opinion, our perspective, or even our rebuttal. This isn't listening. This is simply waiting to speak. Non-judgmental listening is a discipline. It's the act of putting our own thoughts and biases aside, even if just temporarily, to create a space where the other person feels safe to express themselves fully. When someone speaks, they're sharing not just their words, but also their fears, their joys, and their vulnerabilities. Judging those words, or worse, interrupting them, creates a barrier. It shuts down the conversation and often leaves the speaker feeling unheard. But when we listen without judgment, we say, I value your experience. I may not fully understand it, but I want to. That simple act can be transformational. Imagine you're in a conversation with a colleague and they say something you immediately disagree with. What's your instinct? For most of us, it's to jump in and correct them. That's not how it works, or actually you're wrong. But what if instead you paused and asked them to elaborate? What if you said, tell me more about what you mean by that? This isn't about agreeing with them. It's about understanding why they think the way they do. People want to feel seen and heard. They don't always need us to fix their problems or even agree with them. They just want to know that their thoughts matter, that their perspective is valid. Non-judgmental listening creates that space. It's about putting aside the urge to fix, correct, or argue, and simply being present with the other person. You might be thinking, but what if I really disagree? Shouldn't I speak up? And yes, there's a time and place for that. But first, listen fully. Let them finish. Reflect back what you've heard to ensure you understand. Say, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying, and only then, if appropriate, share your perspective. But do so in a way that continues the dialogue rather than shutting it down. The goal isn't to avoid disagreement or difficult conversations. It's to approach them with curiosity rather than judgment. Curiosity opens doors, judgment slams them shut. When we listen with curiosity, we're saying, help me understand where you're coming from. This fosters connection, even when we don't see eye to eye. Think about the last time you felt truly heard. How did that feel? Chances are, the person who listened to you didn't interrupt, didn't judge, and didn't try to fix things. They just let you speak. They gave you the space to express yourself fully. That's what non-judgmental listening does. It creates a sense of safety, of trust. And trust is the foundation of any strong relationship, whether it's with a colleague, a friend, or a family member. When we listen without judgment, we're building that trust. We're saying, I'm here for you, not to judge you, but to understand you. That's powerful. This doesn't mean we have to agree with everything we hear. Non-judgmental listening isn't about abandoning our own beliefs or values. It's about acknowledging that other perspectives exist and that those perspectives are valid to the person expressing them. It's about saying, I see you, I hear you. And even if I don't agree, I respect your right to feel the way you do. The challenge is that we're not wired to listen this way naturally. Our brains are constantly evaluating, analyzing, and forming opinions. We have to train ourselves to quiet that inner voice, to resist the urge to judge or respond immediately. This takes practice. It's a muscle we have to build. Start small. The next time someone is speaking, notice your thoughts. Are you forming a response before they've finished? Are you judging their words or trying to categorize them? If so, gently bring your focus back to what they're saying. Remind yourself, this is their story, not mine. My job right now is to listen. And when you feel the urge to speak, pause. Count to 3 if you need to. This brief moment of reflection can make all the difference. It gives you time to ensure your response. If you choose to respond, comes from a place of curiosity rather than judgment. You'll find that when you listen this way, the quality of your conversations changes, people open up more, they share things they might not have otherwise, they feel safe with you, and that safety is the foundation of trust, collaboration, and understanding. Non-judgmental listening is especially important in leadership. As leaders, we're often looked to for answers, for solutions. But sometimes the best thing we can do is listen. Not to fix, but to understand. To say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm here to support you as we figure this out together. That's what great leaders do. They create space for others to be seen and heard. It's also important to remember that non-judgmental listening doesn't mean you'll always get it right. There will be times when your biases creep in, when you interrupt or when you judge. That's okay. The key is to notice it, acknowledge it, and course correct. Apologize if needed. Say, I realize I interrupted you earlier. Please go on. This shows humility and a commitment to improving. We live in a world where everyone wants to be heard, but few are willing to truly listen. Imagine what could change if more of us embraced non-judgmental listening. Imagine the relationships we could build, the conflicts we could resolve, the understanding we could foster. It starts with a simple choice to listen, not to respond, but to understand. When we do this, we create a ripple effect. The person we've listened to feels seen and valued. They're more likely to listen to others in the same way. And so it spreads. One conversation at a time, we can create a culture of understanding, empathy, and respect. It starts with us. It starts with listening. Listening with empathy requires more than just being quiet while someone else talks. It's about stepping into their world, seeing things from their perspective, and letting them feel heard. When someone speaks to you, they're not just sharing information, they're sharing a part of themselves, their emotions, their experiences. And our job as listeners is to honor that by being fully present and genuinely curious. Too often we listen with the intent to reply rather than to understand. We're thinking about our response while the other person is still speaking. Or worse, we jump in to give advice before they've even finished their thought. That's not empathy. That's problem solving. And while solving problems is important, sometimes people aren't looking for solutions, they're looking for connection. They want to feel understood. Imagine a friend comes to you and says, I've been feeling really stressed at work. A typical response might be, yeah, I know what you mean. Work's been crazy for me too. While that might seem like a way to relate, what you're actually doing is shifting the focus back to yourself. Instead, an empathetic response might be, that sounds really tough. What's been going on at work? See the difference. One dismisses their experience, the other invites them to share more. Empathy is about creating a space where someone feels safe to be vulnerable. It's saying, I'm here for you, and I'm not going to judge you or try to fix you. I'm just going to listen, and in that space, people open up. They tell you things they wouldn't normally share because they trust you'll handle their words with care. But empathy isn't just about listening, it's about how you show up in the conversation. Are you truly present, or are you distracted? Are you looking at them, or are you glancing at your phone? People can sense when you're not fully engaged, and that erodes trust. Being present means putting everything else aside and giving the other person your undivided attention. It's one of the simplest yet most powerful ways to show someone they matter. There's also an element of humility in listening with empathy. It's acknowledging that you don't have all the answers and that it's not your job to fix everything. When someone shares their struggles, it can be tempting to say, here's what you should do. But unsolicited advice often shuts people down. Instead, ask questions. Be curious. Say, what do you think might help, or how can I support you in this? Let them guide the conversation. Empathy is also about being comfortable with silence. Sometimes the most meaningful moments happen when you don't say anything at all. When someone pauses, resist the urge to fill the space. Give them time to think, to process, to gather their thoughts. Silence can be incredibly powerful. It tells the other person, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. And let's talk about body language. How you listen is just as important as what you say or don't say. Are your arms crossed, or are they relaxed at your sides? Are you leaning in, or are you leaning back? Your posture communicates a lot. When you lean in slightly, maintain eye contact, and nod occasionally, you're saying, I'm with you. It's these subtle cues that make a big difference. One of the challenges of empathy is that it requires you to set aside your own feelings and judgments. That's not easy. If someone says something you disagree with or something that triggers an emotional reaction in you, it can be hard to stay neutral. But empathy isn't about agreeing, it's about understanding. You can say, I see where you're coming from, without necessarily agreeing with their perspective. And here's the thing, empathy isn't always comfortable. Sometimes you'll hear things that are hard to hear. You might feel a sense of helplessness or sadness for the other person. But that's part of the deal. When you listen with empathy, you're choosing to share in their experience, even if it's painful. And that shared experience can be incredibly healing for both of you. Now, let's address the elephant in the room time. We're all busy. We all have a million things vying for our attention. But empathy requires time. It requires slowing down and giving someone the gift of your time and attention. And yes, that's a gift. In a world that's constantly rushing, taking the time to truly listen to someone is one of the most generous things you can do. Think about the last time someone really listened to you. Not just heard you, but listened. How did that make you feel? Probably valued, seen, maybe even loved. That's the power of empathy. It makes people feel like they matter. And isn't that what we all want? To feel like we matter? But here's the catch: you can't fake empathy. People can tell when you're just going through the motions. They can sense when your questions are scripted or your responses are canned. Genuine empathy comes from a place of authenticity. It comes from a genuine desire to understand and connect. So how do you cultivate empathy? Start by practicing self-awareness. Pay attention to how you're showing up in conversations. Are you really listening, or are you waiting for your turn to speak? Are you asking questions out of curiosity, or are you trying to steer the conversation in a certain direction? Next, practice active listening. When someone is speaking, focus on their words, their tone, their body language. Don't interrupt. Don't start formulating your response while they're still talking. Just listen. And when they're done, pause before you respond. That pause shows you've taken the time to absorb what they've said. Another way to build empathy is to expose yourself to different perspectives. Read books, watch documentaries, have conversations with people whose experiences are different from yours. The more you understand about the human experience, the more empathetic you'll become. Empathy is a skill. And like any skill, it takes practice. You're not going to get it right every time. There will be moments when you say the wrong thing or fail to truly listen. That's okay. What matters is that you keep trying. And remember, empathy isn't just about big, emotional conversations. It's about the small moments too. It's about asking your colleague how their weekend was and actually caring about their answer. It's about noticing when your friend seems a little off and asking if they're okay. It's about being there for the people in your life in the ways that matter most to them. So the next time someone comes to you with a problem, resist the urge to fix it. Resist the urge to make it about you. Just listen. Be present. Be curious. And most importantly, be empathetic. Because at the end of the day, that's what we all want: to be seen, to be heard, and to be understood.